Hi, I'm doing this podcast in response to a comment that I had on my blog today. And I've got a bit of a croaky voice because it's the end of the day, but I just thought I'd put something on here in response to that comment. Now, the comment was that I use the term Parkies frequently, and predominantly I use it to shorten the name Parkinson's disease. And for me, it has always very much been a separate entity. I do not define myself as being a person with Parkinson's. I am a person who happens to have a condition affecting her, which is called Parkinson's disease. I know that words can be a powerful thing for good and for ill, but I had never thought in doing this podcast or doing my blogs that I would ever give offence by doing so. Now, Parkinson's disease is a serious condition. Very serious, and I take it seriously in that it's not something minor in my life, it's a huge thing. But I refer to Parkinson's, or Parkies as I refer to it, as an uninvited guest in my life. It is a separate entity, it does not define me, it is not me. I am not Parkies. And I'm not sure whether I might have referred to myself as a person with Parkies, or I don't think I've ever called myself a Parkies, nor do I think I ever called anybody else a Parkies. So that's where the offence seems to stem from, referring to a person with Parkinson's as a Parkies. Now, I've always loved words and use a lot of them. Anybody that knows me knows that I talk a lot. And when talking about Parkinson's, I don't want to give it the power to be this major disrupting thing in my life that I can't be honest about, that I can't call it what I want to call it, and worry too much about what people think. If you listen to this podcast, if you listen to Parkies Patter, which is a talk with other people with Parkinson's, you will hear in the podcast that I am referring to it as a separate entity, something that has invaded our lives. I'm so sorry, my voice is so croaky. So it is not me. I am not a Parkies. I am a person with Parkinson's or Parkies. I also don't like the name of Parkinson's being a disease, because it sounds like something that would be infectious that I could pass on to people. Although there might be a genetic element, I don't think it necessarily means that it's something that people can catch from you. So, thinking about it, my husband and I have used the term Parkies from quite early on to give my condition a name. And it's like it's a hitchhiker, something that's attached itself to me that I wish would go away, but it is not me. It very much has never been me. I also have arthritis, and it's quite bad. It's in my knees, it's in my hands, it's in my back, it's in my spine, it's everywhere. My body is riddled with it. And I've said to my husband on occasion, I said, why am I so tired? And he says, because Parky and Arthur are conspiring against you to make you tired. So yeah, we have Parky and Arthur in our lives, both very unwelcome guests, and both we can do very little about apart from managing them. Taking the medications we need to take, taking the painkillers we need to take, and just getting on with life and trying to have as good a life as possible. This sort of debate that I'm having with myself about whether I consider I have used the name of the condition, shortening it to Parkies, in an offensive manner, when I think about that, you can make any word offensive if you emphasise it that way, if you utilise it that way. Now, I was a social worker for 20 plus years and encountered many, many people, and some people could use quite innocent sounding words, but make them offensive. Also, when I was working as a social worker in hospital, I had ended up in the ward. He was a guy from the west coast of New Zealand, and they are salt of the earth types, but they can be a little sweary. So I warn you, there will be some naughty words coming out in any moment now. So this gentleman was from the west coast, and he had a son from the west coast as well. And they were both a little bit rough around the edges, shall we say. And they did use the word fuck quite a lot in conversation. And it's just, for them, it was just like another word as a way of expressing their feelings. It wasn't an offensive word when they were just using it in a sentence to emphasise something. And I was talking to one of the team one day, and they said, they didn't think it was appropriate for this person to use that word, to say fuck in a hospital setting. And I said, well, this guy's had a major stroke. I think we can be forgiven for swearing from time to time, particularly if it's a major part of how he converses, how he uses language. For him, it's not an attacking word. It was just a word that he used for emphasis. And one day I happened to have the son in a room, and we were having a talk about a couple of things. And he started to use that word. And he goes, oh, sorry, Sue. He says, I can't help it. I try not to say it. And I said to him, look, I'm not bothered. I really am not bothered if you use that word. If it helps you, you don't need to sanitize your speech when you're talking to me. Use the word if you want to. And I said, but if you used it at me and used it as an attacking word, like telling me to fuck off, that would not be appropriate, and I would get offended, and I would ask you to moderate your language. But if you're just using it as a term of speech, as you always do, I don't find it offensive. So that, to me, was an illustration of anything can be offensive if you use it that way, and if you intend it that way. And I've had many incidences of those sorts of things. Now, my dad was an Englishman. He came out to New Zealand when he was 21 and spent the rest of his life living here. Now, he was from England, and in New Zealand we often call people from England Poms. Now, my dad, we often used to say, you silly old Pom, to him, and have a bit of a laugh and a joke with him. It was never meant to be derogatory. It was almost like a pet name, calling him a Pom. And when I got together with my husband that I'm with now, by the way, he's a Pom. And she said, oh, is he? And, we just had a little bit of a chat. And when I've talked to my husband and called him a Pom, I've said to him, do you find that offensive? And he said, no, I don't. He said, but it's all in the way that you use the term. And that is the key to me. If I'm using the word Parkies to describe the interloper in my life, I feel that I have a right to do so. I don't use it to offend people. I don't want to infantilize anybody. I don't want to do anything that would upset people. But my blog and my podcast are about me and my life and how I see my life and how I'm affected by Parkinson's, how I'm affected by arthritis, and a myriad of other conditions. It is not meant to be offensive to anyone, but, sometimes I think you can't say much at all these days without offending someone, and that's a shame. I try to be honest and open with any of my communications, any of my thoughts, any of my feelings, but if I'm being offensive or seen to be offensive, then I apologise. But it certainly has never been my intention to belittle people and calling them Parkies and giving offence in that way. So yes, this is my journey with Parkinson's. This is my life with Parkinson's. This is my way of dealing with it, of minimising it to something ridiculous by calling it Parkies, which I know sounds childish, but I would rather use a childish word that makes me not take it seriously than use a professional word like Parkinson's that makes the focus more professional and therefore more serious. And I don't want to treat this seriously. I know it's a serious condition, but I refuse to give it that sort of space in my brain and in my life. So, am I being offensive? I certainly hope not. This has been Sue for Parkies and Me, my journey with Parkinson's. Kia kaha, be brave, be strong, be you.